We all have a favourite race in the Elder Scrolls, but as the protagonist of many games, you seem to bypass many of the typical racial problems that would exist for the everyday guy or girl. So instead of thinking in mere terms of gameplay, of which all the pros and cons are clear, let's think in terms of a lore context. Imagine that you are a soul destined to be thrust into the world of Tamriel as one of the 10 playable races of the Elder Scrolls game series. Which race would you be? Which race is worth it? Is it worthwhile being an Argonian? Is it worthwhile being a Dark Elf? Is it worthwhile being a Redguard? These are the questions that we endeavour to answer in this series of videos. What is up, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Scott from Fudge Muppet, and today I am back to bring you a brand new episode of this Is It Worth It series. In the description below are all the previous episodes, and I will add in the future episodes as they are made. Now, of course, this kind of video has a lot of variables, including personal preference, but we will do our best to analyze each of the races and determine whether or not they are worth being. So today, let's look at the pros and cons, the benefits and detriments to being a Khajiit. Is being a Khajiit worth it? So before we dive into the topic itself, let's just set some things straight. In the previous videos of this series, we explained the parameters, but just to recap, we are making two assumptions to add some consistency to the evaluation. One, we are assuming that each race is born in their respective homeland, and two, we are talking about a contemporary context, meaning the time of Skyrim, which is the 201st year of the 4th era. But yes, that's all we need to know for now. Time to get down into the nitty-gritty. So for this video, if we were a soul in the Elder Scrolls universe that could choose to be any of the playable races, would being a Khajiit be worth it? Let's begin. The Khajiit, the curious cat people who hail from the eccentric Elsweyr, a land of jungles, beaches, deserts and canyons, a warm place filled with the sentient cats of all different shapes and sizes. Now, this is the very first thing to consider if being a Khajiit is worth it. Are you willing to play the Khajiit roulette? You see, when a Khajiit is born, the particular feline form, whether it be mammoth-sized cat or humanoid cat, or those tiny house cat-like Alfiq, it's all decided by the phases of the two moons, Massa and Secunda. It's kind of weird, but cool at the same time. Imagine being a Cathay breed and having a child that becomes a Sench Rat, also known as the enormous battle cats. It would be a little bit odd. These breeds, or feline forms, are referred to as furstocks. Now, we do have to make an assumption here to accurately discuss being a Khajiit. As a soul choosing to be a Khajiit, you wouldn't necessarily have a choice of timing nor control of the moon phases, so I think it would be fair to assume that you don't know what furstock you would become. You may not even be humanoid. You have to consider that reality, but this cat breed roulette is something that could have a profound effect on your interaction with the other races of Tamriel. For example, if you were born as either the Ohms or Ohms Rat furstocks, you may get away with very smooth and somewhat normal foreign interactions, as you look quite like the races of men or elves, bar a few feline aspects. Compare that to the Alfiq, where you appear as an actual house cat, or the Sench Rat battle cats. Many foreigners would not even be able to distinguish you from other animals. It would be a very, very weird experience for them, and would likely bring some prejudice and limit friendly interactions. However, if you were the more common furstocks that we have played in the modern Elder Scrolls games like the Suthay Rat or the Cathay, we already know they experience their fair share of prejudice as well. Naturally acrobatic and stealthy, Khajiit are often known to be skilled thieves. I mean, they even have a thief god called Rajin, and this reputation negatively affects even those who aren't thieves. You would have seen firsthand such levels of prejudice in two Elder Scrolls games in particular, Morrowind and Skyrim. In Morrowind, they are essentially seen as slaves by the Dunmer, and along with Argonians, Khajiit make up the majority of the Dunmer's slave force. In Skyrim, you see the trading caravans of Khajiit that are forced to stay outside the city gates for fear of their potential thievery and mischief. Simply because the Khajiit are so wildly different from most races of Tamriel, it is likely anywhere you go outside of Elsweyr, you will experience some level of discrimination, whether it be distasteful comments about your race or full-blown enslavement. So I would already say straight up, unless you're going to remain in Elsweyr, being a Khajiit is not worth it. You could argue it may be fun to travel with a Khajiit caravan where you would still have other Khajiit that you can trust, or potentially become a thief or assassin in some other province, but it would be harder to blend in and you would likely be the first to blame. But how about enjoying the warmth of elsewhere amongst your own kind? Well, as far as I can tell, it would seem to be a pretty sweet deal in terms of climate and enjoying your own kind, and historically there have been tensions between the borders of Valenwood and elsewhere, but in the current 201st year of the Fourth Era, elsewhere, specifically its two kingdoms, Anaquina and Palatine, have become client states of the Aldmeri Dominion since the Thalmor allegedly returned their precious moons after their disappearance during the Void Nights, year 98 of the Fourth Era. We can look at this in two ways. First, you have to realize that you are under the control of the Thalmor and, by extension, the Aldmeri Dominion. Now, this could be beneficial for you. I mean, it's not like the other races of Tamriel are particularly accepting of you either, and having the elves on your side doesn't particularly sound like a bad thing. Perhaps you could put your natural agility and quiet feet to use as a Thalmor agent, spy, or assassin, making yourself useful to the regime. But if you aren't quite fond of entering a career that involves working for the Thalmor, living in Aldmeri-controlled elsewhere could still be pretty good, considering that now border tensions and conflicts with the Bosmer of Valenwood should be managed and controlled by the Thalmor. After all, you are now allies under the Aldmeri Dominion, so arguably the home front at elsewhere could be pretty peaceful right now. And as far as we know, there have been no enforced religious mandates on the people of elsewhere, like the White Gold Concordat. So with the information we have in terms of political stability and peace, it would seem worth it to be a Khajiit in elsewhere during the 201st year of the Fourth Era. And as we already established, foreign relations as a Khajiit are way harder to navigate. Pretty much every other race has an advantage over them, with the exception of the Argonians. But the important thing here is to look at what actually being a Khajiit means, in terms of society and culture that you would experience on a day-to-day basis. For starters, let's talk about moon sugar and skooma. These narcotic substances are also what give the Khajiit a bad name continent-wide. The Khajiit often refer to moon sugar as crystallized moonlight, trapped by the glimmering waters of the Topal Sea and washed to the sugarcane groves of the 10-mile forest by the tides under the guidance of Homora. Homora is the equivalent of Hermaeus Mora in the Khajiit pantheon, which itself is a little different to most, not clearly dividing the Aedra and Daedra into distinctions of good and bad. But it would seem that both Aedra and Daedra would take the back seat when compared to their moon gods and the cosmic force Riddle-Thar. The Khajiit believe that by consuming moon sugar, they are consuming a small portion of the eternal souls of the moon gods, known to them as Joan and Jode, driving them into fits of ecstasy and abandon. Despite the extremely addictive nature of the sugar, it is an integral part of Khajiit life and the chief export of elsewhere. So if you are considering whether or not being a Khajiit is worth it, I hope that you have a sweet tooth. Because the Khajiit definitely do. Their moon sugar consumption has led them to indulge in candies, cakes, puddings, and interestingly named sugar meats, which all make up the staples of the Khajiit diet. So tasty treats aside, or should I say staples of the diet aside, what is there to life as a Khajiit? What career paths? What professions? Well, let's first accept the fact that your particular fur stock will vary the answer greatly. If you are born as an Alfiq, the house cat-formed Khajiit, then perhaps spying or magical pursuits would be favoured. You would be unlikely to run into combat looking so cute and furry. Whereas as a Sench battle cat, your options would seem rather limited to hunting, transport, and combat. You aren't exactly going to be smithing, crafting, or cooking without opposable thumbs. For the more humanoid-shaped fur stocks, your options would vary more so, but of course, natural agility and stealthiness lends itself to the roles of agents, assassins, and thieves, but not all those roles are so legal. If you were to happen as a Ohms breed, then perhaps diplomatic or mercantile endeavors may work out well for you, and certain Khajiit, such as the Parmar Rat, would have their natural form lending them to more combat-oriented roles, versus the Dagi, who are smaller and can dwell in the branches due to their light weight. So, as a Khajiit, there are various amounts of classes, professions, and roles that one could take, but there is something that is particularly unique to the Khajiit people. You see, the kitty has claws. The Khajiit come with naturally sharp claws which they often use in the place of blades. Like, why need daggers when you can simply claw someone's neck open? In Khajiit culture, use of these claws has actually been developed into various martial arts, such as Gautfang, Whispering Fang, and Rawlith Kaj. So if you are a bit of a martial arts enthusiast, being a Khajiit may very well be worth it. but still, despite their proficiency with claws, they still use all varieties of weapons. But knowing all this, I can tell you for one, if I were a soul destined to be transported into the Elder Scrolls universe, choosing to be any of the 10 playable races, I still don't think being a Khajiit is worth it. Like, of course they are fun to play, and they have a really unique culture and biology, and living in Elsweyr as one could be a pretty sweet deal, but they would arguably have some of the worst potential for traveling and exploring Tamriel, namely because a lack of understanding and prejudice against them. It's something that you yourself would have to take into account when deciding for yourself whether or not it's worth being a Khajiit. But like I said for myself, within a lore context, I think that there are just many better options of races to pick that I would actually want to be, ones with equally unique cultures but other added benefits. But that is it, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for watching, but before I go, be sure to tell me in the comments below whether or not you think being a Khajiit is worth it. We also only have Nord and Dunmer videos left to discuss, so let me know which one you want to see next. Thanks so much again for watching. My name is Scott from Fudge Muppet, and I'll be back to nerd out with you again next time.